Hey everybody, today we're going to have a look at our very first VB program. We're going to look at the very first kind of common program that most programming students look at when they're first learning how to program in any language, and that is the Hello World assignment. So this is our first VB project. So I'm going to take you through how this is developed. It's going to be a fairly simple, straightforward assignment, and I'm going to be referring back to the previous video about how to do certain things. So let's get started. So the first thing we got to do is we have to develop our form here, right? So we're going to add 3 buttons to our form, and remember there's a couple of ways to add them. You can either drag them onto the screen like so, or you can double click them. Now you notice a second button has been added, or you can click on the button object over here in the toolbox and then draw your button on the screen. So you have a few options, as I referred to in the previous video, as far as creating your objects on the screen. So that's kind of what we're going to do here so far. One of the key things that we've kind of talked about is making sure that you're renaming your objects as you're putting them on the screen. Now I'm going to do it all at once, and that's typical. Usually we kind of rename everything. Once we've got everything on our form, we rename everything. And we talked about this in class, but this is something that's pretty important as far as making sure that you can refer to these objects with appropriate names. So I'm going to rename all of our objects. And there is a naming convention. There's a note on this in the website, but there's a naming convention that we can use, and it's called the intercat method or camel code. And that is basically using prefixes to label all of our objects. So if you look over here in the properties window, you can see at the very top, as long as you have A to Z selected, which means that they're in alphabetical order, you go to the very top, you'll always see name at the top. Even though we're in alphabetical order, you'll see the name property at the very top. And we're just going to change the name of this to BTN display. Now when we change the name, that doesn't change anything else about the object. You won't see any physical changes over here on the form. Nothing will change. But we've got a name. Now this object has a specific name that we're going to use to refer to that object. We're going to do the same for this button over here. We're going to click on the name property, and we're going to change this to BTN clear. Okay. Notice again, nothing has changed with the button. Nothing has changed over here. And then a third thing, we're going to add BTN exit, because we want to be able to exit the program at any point in time. So this is called the design time. So when we're in design time, basically what we're doing here is we're designing our form, and we're changing some of the properties to make it look the way we want to. Okay. Now there's one other thing that we want to change in this, and that's the form name. So if we click on the blue part of the form, and only single click, because if you double click you'll end up in the code window, and we don't want to be there yet. So notice here we've got form 1 up. I'm going to change the name of this form to FRM first. It is our first program. I'll say first hello, because that's a good combination of what it is. So now we've got all of our objects renamed. Okay, everything is renamed. But now we have to change some of the other properties associated with these so that it looks the way that we want it to. You can see that by that look of this form, it doesn't actually show anything. It doesn't tell us anything about what needs to happen in the program. So we're actually going to add, we're going to change the text that's on each one of these objects. And the property that we're going to change, that will change the text of an object, is the text property. It's called the text property. So first thing is, the form. We've got the form selected. Notice we're in form first hello. So we're going to change this to hello world. And when we hit enter, notice that hello world changes in the blue box at the top of our program. We're going to do that with our button as well. We're going to go to the text property, and we're going to change this to display message. What this does is this tells us what this button does. So when I'm a user and I go in and I look at the screen, I can see that display message is what this button is going to do. This button is going to be my clear button, so I'm going to change, again, the text property. You'll note that down here. I'm going to change the text property to clear, and then I'm also going to change this last button, which is going to be our exit button, and I'm going to change the word to exit. Now, in Windows programming, when you're programming using Visual Basic, you'll often see this little X at the top of the screen, and you can exit a program by using that little X, that little close button, but it's good programming style to add an exit button. Every program you create should have an exit and a clear button with it. That's just kind of really good programming style when you're working with Visual Basic or any visual language for that matter. You should always be creating clear and exit buttons so that there's a way to exit the program or to restart the program when you need to. Okay. So we also need to change this labels text property. So we haven't actually renamed this label yet. So let's go back and rename the label. Now, prefix for a label is LBL. Okay, and there will be a note that will be done, or there'll be something displayed that will help you kind of look at all the different prefixes for all the different objects. But in this case, the prefix for a label is LBL. And we're just going to call this one LBL message. Again, remember, because we're changing the name, it doesn't actually change anything about the label except for how we refer to it in our code. And we'll be looking at that in a minute. The very next thing we need to do is change the text property of this label. So this text is going to say hello world. Oops. Okay, so now you see the word hello world showing up in the text property. Okay, so now basically our form looks the way we want it to. The only thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to make some changes to some of the kind of these are more like formatting changes. So I'm going to make hello world really big. I'm going to make the text of hello world really big. So to do that, I'm going to go up to this font, and if I click the three little dots beside font, I'm going to be able to come up and change the font to whatever I want it to. So I'm going to make it fairly big. I'm going to make it 36, bold, and you can change the font type. Everything is available to you here. So there's hello world. We got a nice big hello world there, and I'm going to center it on the screen. Now you're going to see I'm actually going to change this in a minute, and I'll explain in a minute. Display message, I'm going to make this button a little bit bigger just by dragging the handles out, and I'm going to change the font of that as well so that the text shows up a little bolder there, so that the screen just looks a little bit better. I'll do the same with clear. It's not necessary to bold it necessarily, but I just like to bold it just to give it that really good kind of clear look here. So here's our program. It's basically set up. Now there's one last thing I want to talk about, and that's labels. One of the things you'll notice is that anytime you change a label, the size of the label's box shrinks and is exactly the same size as the text that's inside it. That works for the most part, but often, this being an example, we don't want that. We want the text to kind of stay in the same spot all the time. And there's a property of a label that we can change that will avoid the label resizing itself every time that we click it, and that's the auto size property. So you can see the auto size property, and we're going to change that auto size property to false. And when we do that, notice how the handles now appear and allow us to change the size of our label. So I'm going to make the size of our label basically the same width as the form, a little bit shorter. And then there's another property I'm going to change of our label down at the very bottom, and it's called the text align property, and that allows us to center this text in our form. So we can either go top, middle, or top center, or middle center. Now middle center is what I want. See how it centers it vertically and horizontally. So basically you get this little dialog box that comes up and gives you kind of a visual representation of where the text should center itself, and you get to choose whichever one you want. Now we've got our form designed. This is what I wanted to do. So when you're programming in Visual Studio or any programming language that has a visual a GUI interface, meaning graphical user interface, when you're programming these windows, they are what are called event-driven languages. And so an event-driven language requires something to be done with the program in order for any code to execute. So some sort of an event has to happen. Those events are things like clicking on buttons, or typing in a text box, or a form loading up. Events are things where the user interacts with the program. So when we want to code our program, what we do is we actually want to go into the coding of each one of these objects. So we want to actually code these buttons, because that's when we want the code to perform, is when the user clicks on that button. Okay. So we're going to do our display message button first. So I'm going to double click on that. Okay, and notice what happens here. So now we've got some things that are a little different, and you may not have seen this before. So what happens here is now we have this code window, and you'll notice the cursor is inside of this sub procedure here. This is called a sub procedure. You see private sub btn display underscore click. Later on in the course, you're going to learn about what all of this stuff means, but right now you don't really need to know it. You only need to know that this here is our sub procedure, and this is where you're going to be putting the code. It has to be between this private sub and this end sub. Okay, so your code has to go in between this for the display click event. You'll also notice this class statement at the beginning. That's the form's class statement, and then there's an end class statement. Make sure you don't delete those, because if you delete those, you'll no longer have access to the form. The VB will give you an error. So one of the key things that programming in Visual Studio and Visual Basic is kind of centered on, and most languages are centered on this as well, is called assignment statements. And assignment statements are statements that essentially assign a value to an object, or assign a value to a variable, and we'll get to variables later on in the course. And so assignment statements are things that assign values to something else. And so I'm going to show you how to write an assignment statement. So first thing we want to do is we want to think of which object we want to change. So I'm just going to go back to the design for a minute. So when I click this button, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have this object appear on the screen. It's not going to show up at the beginning. We're going to actually set a property of this label. We're going to set a property of this label to false that displays it on the screen. So then when I click this button, I want this to appear. Okay? So display message is literally going to do that. It's going to display this message. When I click on the clear button, we're going to actually clear it, and we're going to remove it from the form, so you no longer see it. And then obviously the exit button is going to exit the code. So there is a property that we have for labels that allow us, or for any object on the screen for that matter, that allows us to show or not show that object. And as makes kind of sense, that property is the visible property. You can see down here it determines whether the control is visible or hidden. Okay, so we want to hide that off the bat. So when the program first starts up, we don't want to see that. You're going to click on the display message button and it's going to show up. So we're going to go here. Sorry, we're going to go to the visible property. We're going to set that visible property to false. Okay. So now when we run the program, we won't see this. And then we're going to code this display message button. Okay. Now, assignment statements in Visual Basic, at least for the very beginning, take the form, and I'm going to put this in a comment, and you'll see the little apostrophe that I've put in there, and you'll see that it'll show up green. And that's because the computer's going to ignore this, but it's object.property equals value. Okay, now that's not actual code, that's just the syntax that I want to use in order to do an assignment statement. So which object do we want to change when this button is clicked? Again, going back to our form, we know that it's this object. Okay, we want to change the label. And what property do we want to change? We want to change the visible property. We want that to go from false, which we just changed to false, to true. So we go here, we're going to say LBL message dot visible, that's object.property, and then we have to assign it a value. That value is true. So we're going to make that visible property true. You can notice it takes this format, object.property equals value. We run our program, and when we run our program, we should see the form pop up. Notice that the label is not there. We click display message and hello world shows up. Okay, perfect. That's what we want. Now we want to program the clear button so that it resets the form back to its original state. And really all we need to do with the clear button in this program is make this label invisible again. So we double click on the clear button to get into the clear code window. Notice now a new sub procedure has come up here. Private sub btn clear underscore click. And again, using this object.property equals value, we're going to do the same thing. The object is that label again. The property is again the visible property, but in this case, we're going to make that visible property false. So assignment statements in Visual Basic always take this, not always, sorry, at least for the first little while when you're programming, they're going to take the format object.property equals value. Okay? Object.property equals value. You can see there we've done it twice. LBL message is the object, that's our label. The property we want to change is the visible property, and we want to change the value to true in this case. We want to assign the value to true. Same thing happens here. LBL message dot visible equals false. Object.property equals value. You want to learn that, kind of keep it as a mantra in your head. So now we run the program, and now we have two buttons programmed. So we click display message, it shows hello world, we click clear, and it gets rid of hello world. As we click them, we can go back and forth because every time we click on that button, it's going to perform the code that's in that button. The last thing we need to program on our form is this exit button. And this one is super easy. The exit command for Visual Basic is simply the word end. Okay? That's it. That's all you have to put. So in your exit button, all you have to do is click the word end. And now we have a fully functioning program. We click the play button again, our program runs, we click display message, it shows our label, we clear it, it gets rid of our label, we display it, it displays our label, clear, display, and then we can also click this exit button to end our program, and now our program is done. Okay. So, really quick review. Basically, we've covered putting objects onto the screen, making sure that you rename your objects as you add them to the screen using the intercap method, where you have a prefix that's all lowercase and you capitalize any word that's after that. Okay. We need to change the text property. The text property is the property that shows text on the screen. Sorry, yeah, anywhere on any object. Okay. So the text property of the label shows the text in a label. The text property of a button shows the text in a button. The text property of our form shows the text up here. Okay. So we did that, and then we also looked at coding. Okay, looking at sub procedures. And by the way, this was just a comment I was putting in there for you to understand what an assignment statement looked like. We don't need that code in there. That's not part of our code. That was just me kind of showing you this object.property equals value thing. So I run the program, okay, and just to show you that code didn't do anything, right? Display message clear, exit. So everything works exactly the same way. Okay, so that was the other part we had to look at, is this idea of sub procedures. This is the click event of the display button. This is the click event of the clear button, and this is the click event of the exit button. And so this Visual Basic, being an event-driven language, requires there to be a sub procedure that that will code the actual object. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. Stay tuned for the next lesson, where we're going to take this a little bit further, and we're going to look at how we can add to that program and make it a little more, do a little bit more for us. Okay, all right, guys, thanks for watching.